Welcome back to Learn Spanish World, my amigos. Today, I have a very special story. This is Joe. Joe is your typical average American teenager. Este es Joe. And this is his story. And this is the story of how Spanish changed Joe's life forever. Do you want to know what happened? Joe used to attend the Spanish classes in his high school. It was a typical afternoon on a Friday morning. Joe was in the Spanish class. He had no interest. He would usually just fall asleep in front of the teacher. The teacher would tell him, "Joe, you should pay attention. You never know when Spanish could help you." But this was to no avail. Joe kept sleeping and sometimes even snoring, making his Spanish teacher mad. "Joe, why don't you pay attention? You should learn Spanish, it's an important language." Joe couldn't wait to go home. He couldn't care less about conjugating verbs or complicated grammar. Every day, after the school finished, Joe would run back home and he would forget about any Spanish-related work. The years went by, the months went by, the days went by, and life moved on. Joe grew up and eventually became an adult. He had some goals in life. He wanted to travel around the world. And this is why he decided to visit a beautiful country, Australia. He was so excited at the airport that he couldn't stop posting pictures and experiences that he lived in this wonderful country. Joe visited some of the most beautiful places in Queensland, Victoria, and New South Wales. He absolutely fell in love with Australia. He enjoyed its weather, its people, its magnificent landscapes, and he wouldn't stop talking and telling his friends about it. During his trip, Joe met many friends, and he couldn't wait to go out with them to have fun. One day, Joe received a phone call. He was invited to a party by his Aussie friends. The music was incredible, not to talk about the atmosphere. And this is when Joe met Mary for the first time. He immediately clicked with Mary. It was as if he had known her for his entire life. She was so much fun and lovely. He felt so relaxed and at ease with her. It didn't take long for them to become best buddies. They used to go for walks together, they used to go for a coffee and talk about all kinds of things. Joe was very happy and he felt he was drawing closer and closer to Mary. Each day more and more. As the time went by, Joe and Mary started liking each other. They went traveling together. They went to the movies, and Joe started to fall in love for Mary. It was like the perfect girl in his life. They spent countless hours talking over the phone till dawn, till very late at night time. He told Mary everything about his life and his feelings, and so did Mary. It wasn't long before they started falling in love for each other. Joe and Mary were so happy together. They spent the next few months together, having some wonderful times and enjoying life. This is when Joe told Mary that he really liked her and he was in love with her. Mary couldn't be any happier, as the feelings were mutual. They had so much fun together. They laughed, they joked. Mary absolutely adored Joe. He was her perfect guy, her knight in shining armor. They were so happy together. They were inseparable. But once again, time went by. Weeks, days, weeks, months. He didn't realize how quickly time went by. And the day for Joe to return to the United States was drawing near. And he started dreading the idea of going back because he was so in love with Mary. He just panicked at the prospect of losing Mary forever. On the other hand, Mary was extremely sad because she really liked Joe. Joe was telling Mary that he was gonna be applying for different jobs to see whether he could get his visa extended. He said, "Don't worry, I'll find a job somehow. I will be able to extend my visa." One night Joe was sleeping and he was dreaming about leaving Australia and leaving the woman of his dreams behind. He felt so sad that when he woke up, he was in tears. He couldn't bear the idea of leaving Mary behind. This was the woman of his life, so he went for job interviews, but unfortunately, he got rejected everywhere he went. But every single interview, people said, "I'm sorry, but we don't have enough positions for you." He went interview after interviews just to hear the same thing. "There are no jobs here. You better go back. Thanks for applying. Don't call us. We'll get back to you." No matter how hard Joe tried to find a job, he just couldn't. All he found was angry faces and people telling him to stop wasting their times. Joe tried persisting and insisted for jobs with some companies, but all he got back was a no, no, no. Joe was incredibly discouraged. One day, he broke in tears. He couldn't bear the thought of losing Mary. What would happen if he went back? He'd probably never see her again. That would be the end of everything. That's when one day, reading the newspaper, he found an interesting ad. They needed a Spanish teacher. He started remembering, wow, I used to learn Spanish back in the States. I did Spanish in my primary school and secondary. I know a little bit more Spanish than most people. What if I give it a go? Maybe Spanish will help me. It may be the solution for me to be able to stay and get to know Mary even better. So Joe told Mary about the news and mentioned how he had applied for the job. They were so happy, their smiles came back. They had a smile on their faces once again. Joe was so excited and he was so enthusiastic about refreshing his knowledge of Spanish in order to help others. Joe soon received a phone call inviting him to go for an interview. He wasted no time and quickly rang the principal back to accept the offer. "Yes, we do need a Spanish teacher." Joe was so happy. He didn't waste no time, made sure he left early in order to arrive early at the school. He couldn't miss this opportunity. He wanted to stay and perhaps start a new life with Mary. "Hello," greeted the principal. "Welcome to our school. I heard that you know Spanish." Joe enthusiastically explained all about his classes in Spanish while he lived in the States. He really impressed the panel. He had really gone through the notes and his old books. He explained to the panel how much he now loved the Spanish and how willing he was to help children in Australia learn the language. He went on to say that he had many friends who spoke Spanish in the States, where Spanish was not a foreign language. It was also part of the local area. And not long after this, he was offered a position as a Spanish teacher. The immigration department decided to extend his visa and eventually he became a permanent resident. He was so happy. Over the next months, the love between Joe and Mary grew even more and more. Mary was so happy and proud of Joe. Joe couldn't wait to share with his friends and family back in the States that he had found the woman of his life and the perfect job. One thing led to another, and before too long, Joe proposed to Mary. They were so in love. Mary immediately said yes. She accepted, and they got married. They married to be together, to live happily together. Time went by, the months went by, years went by, and the love of Mary and Joe grew stronger and stronger. Not too long after they got married, Mary fell pregnant. And eventually, she gave birth to a beautiful girl. She called her Maria. A year later, they became parents once again. Peter, or Pedro, was their second kid. They were so happy. They were the best of friends and they loved each other. They lived happily ever after, and their children became bilingual. They were able to speak Spanish and English perfectly well. And this is the story how Spanish changed Joe's life. This teaches us a big lesson. You never know when Spanish may change your life. Joe thought Spanish was irrelevant, but he admitted if it wasn't for Spanish, he would have never ended up marrying the woman of his life, and his children would have never been born. Think about that. Very good, my dear amigos. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my channel. I may start uploading more motivational stories to motivate you to learn Spanish. Joe's story is real. It did happen. Joe and Mary do exist. This is an excellent example of how a language can not only expand your horizons, but it can truly and literally change your life. Muy bien, amigos, it's been a pleasure. I'll see you next time. Subscribe. Hasta la vista. Adiós.